All right, so we're back, and let's take one last stab at applying classical conditioning to, in this case, humans. And what I've tried to do in these slides is kind of mock up what Watson did with little Albert. This is not little Albert by any stretch of the imagination, but I found a picture of a kid on the internet. So here we have a neutral stimulus, which is a little white rat. And naturally, for the toddler, the little white rat is pretty neutral. It's an animal. It might be interested and stuff like that, but isn't inherently fearful per se. So when presented with the little white rat, little Albert shows no response. Now, let's say, this is not a sound I'm playing for you, so don't worry about it. An unconditioned stimulus, a loud noise. So we make some kind of loud noise that startles the toddler and he cries, right? Produces the unconditioned response of crying. So typically when startled by a loud noise, the baby tends to cry. So we would say the noise is an unconditioned stimulus. The child doesn't have to learn that it's scary, and they produce the unconditioned response. Oh, wait, I do have a loud noise. I don't know if you heard that or not. I forgot it had a noise. Well, it's pretty startling. It made me jump, so I won't let you hear it anyway. Okay, so during conditioning, they present the neutral stimulus, followed by the unconditioned stimulus, and the baby cries, right? Because it's responding to the unconditioned stimulus. But just like with the dog and the food, we're going to pair the rat and the noise several times and startle the baby over and over and over again with this rat followed by noise, baby cries. Now that the baby's hopefully been conditioned, we're going to present the rat alone and see if the baby produces the conditioned response of crying. If so, we know that the transition is complete. The rat is now moved from neutral stimulus to conditioned stimulus. So this idea is how Watson was able to induce a phobia of white rats in little Albert. So theoretically, there's, probably little Albert is no longer alive at this point because he'd be, like 100 years old. So probably not. But, for a while there was a man / old man / elderly man walking around who was probably, really scared of white rats. And one of the things that Watson was able to do was get him to generalize that fear to other white fuzzy things like cotton balls. He had a Santa Claus mask that had a white beard, and little Albert was scared of that. And so, the baby responded with, a lot of generalization to white fuzzy things. So I always thought to myself, poor little Albert, he's probably white haired by now. He's probably scared of his own shadow or his own reflection. Pretty sad. But if we can induce this kind of phobia in a child, you can imagine that we might accidentally classically condition, fears, worries, things like that might manifest themselves in personality traits when they get older. All right, so that was Watson taking the Pavlovian concepts and applying them to children. Let's take another type of learning and talk about that. B.F. Skinner was what was called a radical behaviorist, because if Watson said we should only discuss those things that we can directly observe, Skinner took that concept of behaviorism and made it even more radical and said, you know what, not only can we only talk about what we can directly observe, we should not develop any kinds of models, explanations that would invoke thinking or a mind or anything like that, because we can't see those things happening. And so all we can talk about is what's happening out in the environment. So B.F. Skinner, like Watson, thought that personality was basically, responses to the environment. But Skinner focused in on particular aspects of the environment as being the most important for shaping personality. Now, he followed a school of thought called radical determinism, which said all behavior is caused. Now, this is not what we mean. If you've ever taken philosophy, that is not what philosophers are talking about as far as determinism. I think a lot of times people, when they talk about determinism, they're saying, like predetermined, right? God's in control or other kinds of things. That's not what we're talking about here. Radical determinism is just saying that all behavior is caused by something, and that we should be able to figure out the cause of that behavior. One problem with radical behaviorism is that we are never allowed to say it's being caused by thoughts inside the person's mind. You're never allowed to have that as the explanation because you can't directly confirm that they're having the thoughts that you think they're having. So, and it's funny because obviously Skinner knew about mind's thoughts, all those kinds of things, because he used his mind and he had thoughts. So, I mean, he's not trying to say they don't exist. They said we can't use them as explanations for the causes of behavior. So we have to figure out more observable causes of behavior. Skinner founded a school of thought, a type of learning theory that was called operant conditioning. In this type of learning, your behavior is being changed by its consequences. So you do something and then the environment gives you feedback about that behavior. It either encourages that behavior or discourages that behavior, or it ignores the behavior, like nothing happens. Those consequences help to determine whether you ever do that behavior again. He's famous for developing a apparatus called the Skinner box. You know that you're a big name in an area when things are named after you, right? So Skinner box being named after him, he referred to it personally as his Operant Chamber, which was this box where you could put either a rat or a pigeon, and a rat with its little paw can push a lever. A pigeon with its beak can peck at a little panel. So you'd set it up slightly differently for a rat or a pigeon, depending on what they could use to respond with. And then you could give them consequences for their behavior. You can give them little food pellets if they do behaviors that you like. You can electrify the bottom if they do a behavior you don't like, right? You can shock them, things like that. So the Skinner box was really super important for shaping the behaviors of really common participants for Skinner, rats and pigeons. I keep wanting to say penguins, pigeons. All right. Now, Skinnerian logic, his, operant conditioning model was based on an earlier researcher named Thorndike, who developed a law of effect. All right. This box is not a Skinner box that you're seeing here. This is Thorndike's puzzle box that he would stick cats inside. I've tried to put a cat in a carrier and had nothing but scratches, and I don't know how he got those cats into those janky looking boxes, but these puzzle boxes had a lever inside of it that if the cat figured it out, it would cause the lid to pop up and the cat could get out. And so he would put cats in the little Skinner box and then see, sorry, I didn't mean to say Skinner box. I meant to say puzzle box, and then see how much time it took the cat to escape from the box. And what you see is on the x-axis how many times they've been stuffed into the box. I mean, on the 20th time, how did you get that cat back in there? And then on the y-axis, you're seeing how much time in seconds it took for the cat to escape. And what you see is with each subsequent trial, the cat's getting faster and faster. There's a little bit of regression in certain places where they had gotten out really fast, and then the next trial, it took them longer. But overall, the trend is to shorter and shorter time, right? So what Thorndike offered is that when behaviors are followed by favorable consequences, they'll become more likely. And behaviors that are followed by unfavorable consequences become less likely. I don't know why the arrow's going the wrong direction. I've got my little art designed incorrectly here. Oh, that's embarrassing. But if the last behavior that I did resulted in me getting something I want, I'm more likely to do that behavior again. If the last thing that I did resulted in something that I don't like, then I'm less likely to do that behavior again. So that's how Thorndike explained this pattern of cat behavior in these puzzle boxes. If the last thing they did got them out of the box, they were really likely to try that behavior again. That helps to explain why sometimes it took longer on the next trial than it did on the last trial, because it could, in some of those boxes, they had to do like 3 things in a row before the thing popped out. So it wasn't really the last behavior that they engaged in that was the critical one. It was the last 3 things that they did. And so they had to figure that out, right? But if the last thing I did resulted in me getting out of the box, I'm really likely to do that one last thing again. So learning occurred as they figured out, okay, it's actually the sequence sometimes, or it's that, something like that. So Thorndike was like, we can strengthen certain behaviors in the learner by giving them something they want after they do the behavior. We can weaken certain behaviors by giving them something that they don't want. Okay, that's what he called the law of effect. Now, the key thing is you only know whether it's something that learner wants or not based on how they react in the future. So if you give them an outcome that you think is desirable, a favorable outcome, and they don't do the behavior again, it wasn't a favorable outcome for that learner. It wasn't something that they wanted. So part of Thorndike's law of effect refers to you only know what the favorable consequence is based on what behaviors come next. So if the cat gets out of the box and then doesn't repeat the behaviors that cause the lid to come open, maybe they like being in the box. Like maybe freedom was not a favorable consequence for that cat. You have to let the cat show you what the favorable outcome is, right? So I want you to kind of, that might sound vague, but I will apply it in a second when we use a human example. So here's B.F. Skinner and a bunch of his pigeons. Here's one of his rats saying he will press lever for food. Just like Pavlov's dogs will drool for a bell, Skinner's rats will press a lever for food. So a reinforcer is a favorable outcome. It's any outcome that strengthens the behavior that it follows. So with a reinforcer, there are positive reinforcers and there are negative reinforcers. Positive reinforcers are when you're going to add a desirable outcome. So if you were a meerkat and you did something that I liked, I would give you time in front of the heat lamp as a reward, as a positive reinforcement for your desirable behaviors. If you were a child, maybe I would let you pick out your favorite candy from a big array of candies at the candy store. The key thing is you're going to be adding something that the learner wants. If you remember that positive means plus, like add, it'll make this whole model make a lot more sense. It's not positive like good. A lot of people get confused and think, oh, it's a good outcome. It's something that, is objectively good. It's not. It's something that you're going to be adding that the learner wants. So if we gave that child the opportunity to get underneath that sun lamp, I don't think that the child would necessarily do the behaviors again, necessarily, unless it's really cold and the child wants to warm up. The meerkat probably wouldn't work for candy. They tend to eat grubs and stuff like that are protein, so I doubt they'd want to eat any candy. Just because it's desirable for some, it doesn't mean that it's desirable for all. And that's really super important when we think about how to shape our learners' behavior. You can shape your dog, you can shape your children, you can shape your cat. But the outcome has to be something that the learner wants. So you want to add something that for that learner is a desirable outcome, not just what you would want. Like, for example, I like black licorice, and I am aware that most people don't like that, but hey man, I like it. So all of you who get A's on the test, I'm going to make sure that you get some black licorice as a reward. Is that going to be rewarding to you? Probably for a lot of you, no. I'm going to say maybe there's one of you listening right now who's like, right on, black licorice. And the rest of, and that person who also likes black licorice knows just as well as I do that everybody else is going, gross, I don't want that, because that's the reaction we all get when we eat it. So just because I like it, just because I would want it, doesn't mean that you should or that you do want it. And so it's really important as the person who's trying to shape someone else's behavior that you figure out what they want. And when they behave in the ways that you want, then you give them this desirable outcome following that behavior. So the goal of a reinforcer is to strengthen the behavior that it follows. All right, I'm going to stop here and let you watch this little segment from the Big Bang Theory, and then we will come back and discuss that. So I'll see you after this video.